Equal rights for all.
Exactly what are you doing here?
Darling, calm down. Calm down. We have helped build this country. We have nursed soldiers on the battlefields. And we have been denied a basic fundamental right. If something is to happen to you, I cannot keep my home. I cannot make decisions for my children or my family. I expect you to understand this. You've always wanted what's best for me.
This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. Your place is in the home.
What happened to the man I married? What happened?
What happened to my wife?
What happened to the man who always wanted what was best for me? Who wanted equality?
Your place is in the home with the family and our children.
We have been working for a half a decade, women all over this country, for the right to vote. We will not stop until the Constitution is amended. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting to attend.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their just powers from the constant of governed. The history of mankind is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations on the part of man toward women, having indirect object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over her. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has never permitted her to exercise her inalienable right to the elective franchise. He has compelled her to submit to laws in the formation of which she has no voice. He has withheld from her her rights, which are given to the most ignorant and degraded men, both native and foreigners. Having deprived her of this first right of a citizen, the elective franchise, thereby leaving her without representation in the halls of legislation, he has oppressed her on all sides. Our suffrage leader, Alice Paul, says it best: those who hold power are not only responsible for what they do, but they are also responsible for what they do not do. The women's suffrage movement has crusaded for decades to secure the vote for women, and we have protected with grace and dignity. We see now the only language that men understand is war. And therefore, we will move forward with the voices of millions of women, marching in the shadows of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, Lucy Stone, and alongside Carrie Catt, Alice Paul, and Lucy Burns to secure the right to vote for women. Every little girl born in this world will have the same opportunity as her brother.
Mr. President, it is urgent. How can you deny women the right to vote in this election?
In 1870, our own Portsmouth leaders, Mrs. Hall, Mrs. Tracy, Mrs. Glidden, Mrs. Glover, and Mrs. Robinson, along with their husbands, realized the inequalities that exist within the rights of men and women. They fought alongside each other to force change, but they failed. And the rights of women continued to be ignored. It is 1917. It is up to us to join with Lucy Burns and Alice Paul and our sisters across this great land to support the suffrage movement. It is now the time for President Wilson to endorse the 19th Amendment supporting women's suffrage. You can no longer ignore our numbers or our commitment. The women who started this movement are dead. Many of them perished fighting for this cause. Many spent time in prison. Many endured tremendous abuses. But decades have passed. decades have passed. It may seem odd to many of you that this lowly ballot box provides a physical example of what this movement is about, but remember that the ability for women to have a say in the creation of laws that affect them and future generations is worth fighting for. For decades, we have been told to wait our turns while men determine the course of our future. For decades, we have been denied rights as married women. For decades, if single, we have been forced to pay taxes on property that we own, but we have no voice about. For decades, we have been denied access to colleges and schools for education. And for decades, our husbands have had the legal right to our children. I plead with you to join this movement. Join this movement and create a better world for our daughters and for our sons. Sit down with your state and local representatives. Be persistent. In his many speeches, President Wilson has said, "We shall fight for what we hold nearest, our democracy, for the right of the people who would submit to authority to have a voice in their own government." I ask you, Mr. President, how long will women have to wait to have that voice?
The colors of purple and gold and white that are gently blowing in the breeze around you were the colors chosen by the women's suffragette movement, and they unfurled across this nation of ours in an undeniable energy to see to it that women would indeed have the right to vote. You've heard the name already this evening of Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who initially in this movement was so fearful of her own life, she wrote under the pen name of Sunflower. And Sunflower became a symbol of this movement. Many women would put them on their hats or wear them in their lapel or just carry them as a silent testimony of their support for the right to vote. Ohio was a leader. In 1919, when the 19th Amendment was adopted, state by state, we were the 5th state to so approve it. The 36th was Tennessee, and that was all that was needed. And so it's easy for you to remember the 19th Amendment was in 1919. May I read it to you? The right of the citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any state on account of sex.
I'm so sorry. I just don't know what I'm going to do without you. I prayed God would not take you from me. He has already taken Thomas and little Margaret. Our family has gone through enough sacrifice and loss for many families. My tears are falling as I find myself here again in Pottersfield. This place we have found such sadness and shame. My husband, I'm so sorry. There is still no money for a proper burial. No money for a new suit or a nice coffin or even a headstone. I ironed your best shirt and sewed your pants. You look nice. I put a picture of the 4 of us in your hand, and a man from church built your coffin. This is the best we can do. John, we came here for a better life, just the 2 of us, dreamers like so many others. No family for support. When you found that job in the factory, we were so happy. That little apartment above the grocery store was wonderful. I cleaned and sewed for extra money, and you would take extra shifts. But it seemed we never had enough. My husband, I'm looking around, and I'm pretending that this is a pasture. And I can gaze out into the other sections, and I see large monuments bearing the names of great men. You were a great man. You don't need a monument to tell the world you were a good man. And although there should be no shame in being poor, no shame in working hard and still finding it difficult to pay your own way, there is shame. When I met with the cemetery sexton, he was kind but firm. This was the place for people like us, he said. He didn't seem to remember we had been here with our babies. I'm just another poor woman burying her husband without even a penny for a grave. John, I sometimes feel wrapped in darkness, always helpless to change the course. When you were so sick with pneumonia, I tried everything to help you get better. If I had been a better healer, then perhaps you would not be here. Perhaps you lost your will when the doctor said babies had scarlet fever. At church, the pastor said hundreds of children had passed from the fever. But the humiliation of not being able to provide while they were alive seemed to wear on you. The day we buried our babies in Potter's Field, you changed. We both changed. We worked hard. You worked when you shouldn't have. You worked when you were sick and injured, and we both worked through hunger because we were desperate. My sweet husband, now you will rest. You will cradle our babies and tell them how much I love and miss them. I love you with all my heart. I'm placing a cross as a marker on your grave, and in the spring, I will plant daisies. I will not forget you.
Excuse me, have you seen my friend Virginia? She was here with me. She had my hand as we were coming down the stairwell, but I lost her through the smoke. Have you seen Virginia?
No, I haven't. It's been pure chaos since the building's caught fire. Maybe she's made it past, or maybe she's made it to the hospital. There was just no warning. The explosion was so loud, my ears rung for the first few minutes. The sound of the caps from the toys pistols going off. There was just no warning. I tried to gather the girls around me, but there was no use. It was too loud and smoky.
Both my father and my brother don't believe that women should work in factories. They believe a woman's place is in the home. I should have listened. I should have listened when my brother told me that everything in this place was a fire hazard. The caps, the metal, the saws, the heat, everything.
What did you try to tell them?
I tried to tell them that this place was going to make more for me than domestic work or farming. I wanted a better life for myself, and this job was going to help do that. Now look at me, burned and injured. What am I going to do?
We can't think about that right now, but we have to believe that they will rebuild. Surely they will rebuild. Adams has that contract with a company from Cincinnati, and that's why we're working full hours. They have to rebuild. They will not walk away from an opportunity such as this. And we work for so much less than the men. They pay us half the amount that the men make, and we do the same work. They have to rebuild.
What about the time until they rebuild? My mother's widowed, and my brother and I are the sole support of the family. And who's to hire an injured girl? I'm afraid no one.
We're not going to think about that today. Today we pray for the injured.
I kept screaming for the firemen to come inside, but they wouldn't. They said due to the toys we were manufacturing, it was too dangerous, and there could be another explosion, and the whole building would collapse. Me and Virginia were looking for a hose to use, but by the time they got in there, it was just too late. They said that there was a hose on the second floor, but we couldn't get to it.
There was a girl that had jumped from the second story window, and a few more from the third story too. And from what I've heard, one girl even died from this 3-story fall. I understand why they jumped. I almost had to myself. I just couldn't find a window through all the smoke. Everyone was pushing and shoving. Somebody pushed me so hard that I fell down an unfinished staircase and hit my head. It was just so smoky. I didn't know what to do.
The first staircase we came to was covered with smoke too. We tried to find another exit, but there was no way out. We couldn't escape.
Everyone was running and screaming. I'll never forget the sound of over 5,000 toy caps just going up into flame.
Oh, excuse me, but I have to find my friend Virginia. Can you help me look?
Yes, of course.
Oh, excuse me.
Have you guys seen Virginia? She's about this tall, yellow skirt, white blouse.
Virginia?
No. No, Virginia?
Virginia?
Oh, she has red hair. Oh, please help me.
Yellow skirt, white blouse. Anybody?
Virginia?
All passengers scheduled for departure in Portsmouth, please begin collecting your belongings. We're running a tight schedule here today at the station. Please hurry. I have tickets available for the Chillicothe, Circleville, and Columbus stations.
Sister Ellen, Sister Felicitas, please be sure we have gathered all of our belongings. We will be needing these items and much more for our mission. Building a hospital, Mercy Hospital. So please be swift. God has called us to this place at this time, and although we do not understand it, God knows the need. Fevers, diseases, and injuries continue to spread and claim the lives of so many of his children. With his hand on ours, we will find a way. Always remember, the marriage of faith and healing is a miraculous one, and the power of hope is very strong. And this community is providing us a small house to build another hospital. We are so thankful for this opportunity to serve.
I know in my heart this is exactly what God wants us to do, but I'm just not sure how we're going to do this, Sister Blandina. How will we fulfill God's mission? 2 hospitals, Hempstead and Sherman, are so in need. Only 80 beds for a community of 50,000. We'll need so much more if we're going to do this. We need more beds, more nurses, more supplies, more time. How can we possibly make a difference here?
God has called us, and although we often do not understand, He knows the need and enriched us with the skills to stretch and to grow, and the faith to be fearless.
I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, but you know how to do this. The Sisters of St. Francis have been successful with the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, and the great Lord himself has taught you so many great ways of training to help other people in this growing city. And I personally am thrilled to be one of the first to welcome you to this amazing town.
Sisters, we know how to do this. We've never been afraid of hard work. We will plant vegetable gardens to provide nourishment for our patients. We will tend farm animals for fresh dairy every day. We will sew new linens for their beds. We will clean their rooms, and we will tend the fires for heat. We will reach out into this community and teach them how to take care of themselves. They will learn how good practices will discourage the spread of disease. And we will build a larger hospital with surgery and emergency rooms to aid the sick. Faith will pave the way, and we will be God's instruments for kindness and healing to the suffering and to the poor. That is our calling. That is our mission.
And we will train new nurses and assist in surgeries. We will deliver babies. Together, we will provide comfort and care around the clock.
That is truly beautiful, sisters. Always remember that a building is not just the brick and mortar. It is the soul and it is the spirit inside that building that will make it so great. You 3 are about to embark on a wonderful journey that will become Mercy Hospital. So once again, I welcome you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that train will be here in about 2 minutes. I still have tickets available for the Chillicothe, Circleville, and Columbus stations. Please hurry. We're running a tight schedule.
Jacob, how much longer are we going to be able to keep this place open? Every day our customers are getting fewer and fewer, and the women's Christian temperance movement is gaining support. Each day before we open our doors, my heart skips a beat. Will this be the day?
I just don't think they're going to be happy until they've closed all the bars and saloons. They seem insistent that this town's problems are based on liquor. The newspaper's calling it the women's war on whiskey. Don't they see how much we pay in taxes, how much we pay in permits? Don't they see how many people are employed by the breweries? This is not their business. They should stay in the house.
Yes, it doesn't make any sense to me, Jacob. And these are not unreasonable women. They're my friends. Our children go to school with each other. We sit beside them in church. We pass them on the street every day. They're good women, and they truly believe in their calls. But this war on whiskey, it's not just happening in Portsmouth. It's happening everywhere. My only fear is if we can survive it. This saloon is our sole means of support.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Jacob and Elizabeth, we are here to pray for the men who frequent your establishment. We mean you no harm. We will just pray and read scripture. The sale of liquor leads to the destruction of family. Jacob, no good can come from it. Families are being torn apart. Men are spending entire paychecks on liquor and the gambling that takes place in back rooms. It is our duty to stop this.
What about our family? Do we matter? How do you propose that we pay our bills and make our way? This is how we support ourselves, put food on our table, and we are not going to let you close us down. We're not going to be prayed out. I am as temperate as any woman, but I am also a reasonable woman. I own this property, and we are not required by law to let you pray inside. We are a place of business, a lawful place of business, so take yourselves outside to pray and to sing.
Jacob, we need you to sign the pledge to proclaim that you will no longer sell alcohol, but only cider. We truly mean no harm, but understand this, we are not leaving. Jacob and Elizabeth, our community is being ruined by liquor. We can no longer stand silent and allow it to happen. Dozens and dozens of saloons continue to fill our streets, and it's just not right. The church is on our side.
We are not breaking any laws. We are not forcing individuals to come inside. We are one of many small businesses trying to make our way. Do you not have a bottle of wine in your home? Do you not offer your guests a glass of wine when they come to call? Do you frequently have wine with dinner? Is your home absent any alcohol?
Elizabeth, you know that is different because when I serve wine, it is in my private home. You offer alcohol to strangers and sometimes children who frequent your establishment. The public display of liquor is an invitation for trouble.
Praying is to be done in churches. I'm asking you respectfully to leave our place of business.
You have no control over the sidewalks and the streets, Jacob. We will continue to pray and sing right outside your front door. We are not leaving. Instead, Jacob, we are growing in numbers and we will not be defeated. I'm sorry it has come to this, but our town cannot be known as a haven for drunkards. Our streets cannot continue to be filled with breweries and saloons. This is not the city that we fought for.
This is exactly the city our ancestors fought for. A city where the individual can choose. Freedom is what they fought for.
You want to buy us out? Then you provide us with other means of support. But until then, I'm asking you to take your Bible scriptures and your praying out of our establishment.
Jacob and Elizabeth, the worst consequences to the sale of liquor fall to women and children. The human cost is too great for us not to fight. Liquor isn't a medicine. Countless studies have proven that very fact. We will abide by your request, but we will continue to fight. Liquor is one of the greatest evils in our society today. Before we leave, we will offer up a silent prayer for your family.
I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Thank you, and welcome to the First Presbyterian Ladies Annual Meeting.
Excuse me?
This is unacceptable. We as Christian women cannot continue to turn our backs on the children sleeping in the streets. Oh, sweet child, are you okay? You look as if you haven't slept or eaten in weeks.
I had to leave home after Pa died. It was just he and I after Ma died with baby Rose. The lady who came to deliver her said Ma was just too weak and it was too early. After they both died, Pa and I just took care of each other. But now I don't have anyone. It's just me. Anyway, thank you for the sweater.
It's not their fault they've fallen on hard times. Often they've lost their parents to illness or injury and they're all alone with no family to offer a bed or even a cup of soup.
It's appalling to see these precious children begging for food, searching the trash and sleeping under bridges. Other cities have found ways to meet these needs with orphanages and children's homes. I know Portsmouth is not as big as Cincinnati, but if Marietta can do it, why can't we? Last week, Mr. Cotton and I stumbled across a young boy who was sleeping in the alley on Front Street. He was crying from hunger and sheer exhaustion from the situation he had to endure. We bought him some food and clothing and offered him some money, but he refused. We must do better. The time to act is now, not tomorrow, not next week, not next year, now! When Mrs. Havenstein and Mrs. Lodwick and Mrs. Reed and myself visited the home in Marietta, we saw the impact it made on the city and on those children. There just has to be a way.
Mr. Murray Shipley, director of the Cincinnati Children's Home, has agreed to come and address the entire church on this issue. Judge Henry Town will preside, and we will search for suitable housing for the children. The costs will need to be borne by both the community and the city government. The First Presbyterian ladies just simply don't have the necessary funding. We will fundraise over the coming weeks, but it won't be enough for such an expansive project. There is a vacant lot. It's a good place to build a children's home. It's in Greenlawn Cemetery at the edge on a small hill. That area has been undeveloped. I know it's a little unusual to build a children's home in a cemetery, but it's both available and affordable.
And so be it. Over the coming months, we will establish a plan that will create a safe and stable home for all of these children. They need food, clothing, hygiene items, and the list goes on and on. But this is such a huge project. It needs to be a decision made by the entire church. Don't you agree?
Yes.
The need is so great, and the stakes are so high. We need everyone.
First Presbyterian can organize a Sunday school where we can take turns teaching the children. We can offer regular lessons about cleanliness, cooking, and life skills to prepare them for adulthood. They will have books to read, a garden for vegetables, and sewing materials. The other churches will help with quilts and building beds and furniture. Every single child deserves the opportunity to be better, to succeed and become productive. They should not be ashamed. If we work with our church and our community, these children can have access to a better life, and Portsmouth will be better for it. There are 36 children who need a roof over their head, and it is up to us to start the initiative to be better stewards of God's children. Thank you.
Well, it's nice to see you there. We must be kindred spirits in our love of the river. Well, I find myself here most days, walking these docks, reflecting and organizing and recording my thoughts and remembering some of the choices I had to make. I've always been a big journaler, and you might even find a copy of my diary here in your local library. Today I reflect on a life full of adventure, risks, hardships, love, and loss. Am I sorry for opportunities not taken? Perhaps, but I'm a risk taker to my core. As a young man growing up here in Portsmouth, I worked the steam machinery on my father, Levi Moore's farm. People noticed that I had a knack for building and fixing things, and that skill led me to be an engineer, working with Dr. Offner at the old Red Mill. There I learned even more about the workings of steam engines. Each job would provide me a gateway to the next chapter of my life. But it was my time steamboating with Samuel Coles on the steamer Home that truly spoke to me. Riding that steamer from Cincinnati to Pittsburgh would change my life. Now don't get me wrong, the work was often brutal and the conditions were sometimes terrible. Believe me when I say that steamboating is not for the weak. But engineering and shipbuilding would be my calling. I'm sure, like me, each of you at least once in your life has found a time when you felt that your deepest convictions were being compromised. Well, on January 8th, 1861, a shot was fired at a merchant vessel, the Star of the West, one of my ships, while she was attempting to deliver supplies to a small group of Union soldiers who had found themselves surrounded by the Confederacy at Fort Sumter. The shot on the Star of the West, a merchant vessel flying the American flag, well, it symbolized that something had changed. The American Civil War had just begun. Americans were now fighting Americans. Well, the Star of the West was later captured in Galveston Bay by the Confederate Army, and it became the first prize secured by either side during the war. It served as a trophy for the Confederacy and used as a transport vessel. And she continued this forced service until she met her end in the muddy waters of the Yazoo River in 1863. Now, I'm a staunch supporter of the Union, and suddenly I found myself in a situation where I was forced to cooperate with the Confederacy. Watching my riverboats being forced to deliver supplies and troops for the Southern Army, well, it compromised my core convictions. The war was raging all around us, and I had no choice but to take the risk and follow my convictions. You see, my brother Enos and my wife Elizabeth, my daughter Louisiana, and 6 other children were with us in Yazoo. Their safety, as well as the safety of my men, became my chief concern. It was a dangerous situation for all of us. We were Northerners in Southern territory. Well, when the Union Army finally secured Vicksburg, it presented a small window of opportunity for us to escape the Confederacy and return north to Portsmouth. We abandoned our home and most of our possessions there. Our harrowing journey from the South through the war-torn South, well, it would be on Army transport ships. And this voyage, well, it did not afford my family many comfortable accommodations, but they did not complain, not even once. Well, once we returned to Portsmouth, Enos and I, along with D.N. Murray, we founded Murray & Company, which later became the Portsmouth Foundry and Machine Works. Appropriately, the Portsmouth Foundry would manufacture cannons for the Union Army. But it seemed that Enos and I, we just could not get shipbuilding out of our system. So we purchased a 25% share of the Big Sandy and Pomeroy Riverboat Company, and we grew that fleet to a fleet of 6 ships. Sometimes with risk comes rewards. So I want to challenge each of you to be a risk taker. Be a dreamer, to follow your passion and to make each day better. Portsmouth has always been a community full of risk takers, and I urge you to follow their lead as we march to a brighter future. Build your own steamboat. Start your own foundry. Live your own dream. Just find your passion. You'll be better for it. This community will be better for it. Thank you all.
I'm so glad you're here. Come on in. Have a seat. Here's a chair. Sit right down. Come on in. Sit with me a spell. Make yourselves at home. I was just looking through my journals. You no doubt have heard of my pa, Captain William Moore. Captain William Moore, my pa, has always insisted on keeping journals to render one's thoughts to paper and not rely solely on one's ability to remember everything. Imagine that. Well, I've been looking through my journals and I've just been trying to figure out what I wanted to share today. Are y'all from around here? I grew up on the steamboat with my pa, and also my pa stayed down on the Mississippi and Ohio rivers with me till I was 16 years old. I was actually born in a little river town in Louisiana, hence my name. Pa brought us up here and we settled here and been here ever since. Portsmouth's my home. I cannot imagine living anywhere else. Would you like to see a few of my journals? Let's see what I have out tonight. Well, maybe I'll just share a few with you. My penmanship's not always the best. You might remember this one just as vividly as I do. September 4th, 1866. Went to Sunday school and church in the forenoon. Heard of another terrible steamboat disaster. Oh, this one's actually in February 4th. Our community was still reeling from the tragedy that befell the Hurd family just 10 days later, 10 days earlier when the Carter was exploded. Right down the Ohio River, actually, the Missouri steamboat exploded, and Captain Jesse Hurd's wife, Catherine, was the only trace of remains left on that Missouri steamboat. Well, they looked at that and then didn't realize that others were on down the river fighting for their lives in the Ohio River. The papers were filled with ads looking for missing persons from the Missouri, and the coroner's inquest tried diligently to identify the bodies of those who were in the river. 65 people lost their lives in the Missouri. And then, 10 days later, the W.R. Carter exploded. And ironically, it was captained by Jacob Hurd, the brother of Jesse Hurd, who had captained the Missouri. What an affliction to befall one family. Well, Ma, Mary and I went to the funeral of Mrs. Hurd and the younger boy, Henry. It was so crowded. I remember the younger boy being brought in, wrapped up in a comfort, while the older son, Arthur, walked in, having only broken his arm in the explosion. What a sad, sad sight it was to see two from one family lying there at the same time in their coffins. See what else it says here. Oh, it says that the U.S. Steamboat Inspection Service decided to outlaw the use of tubular boilers on steamboats after these horrible tragedies. Well, I'm glad something good came out of all that sadness, aren't you? I'm so glad you're here with me. Let's see if we can find another one. March 6th, 1871. Last night, I was awakened by the wind rattling the windows. So I had to get up and fasten them. I afterwards fell asleep again and was next awakened by the fire bells. Oh, what a night for a fire. The wind was howling, almost a gale. I went to the back window and saw the fire already under fearful headway. Paul, Jimmy, Paul Ricker hurriedly dressed and went down to the corner of 2nd and Market Street. Oh, what a night that was. It was between 1 and 2 in the morning, and that fire raged on till past dawn. The only thing to save Market Street was that it was so wide. That ferocious wind blew flames and smoke and cinders 3 blocks away. The men fought diligently to put out the flames as they were kindled by the sparks, but sadly nothing could be done to save the squares from 2nd to Front and from Market Street west to the alley. Well, we went down to the scene of the destruction the next morning. I remember seeing the smoking ruins of Massey Block and Taylor House and the New Addition and 6 other buildings. We were looking around and there were so many people in the streets and open spaces. Some were looking on, as we were. But sadly, others were there collecting what little was left of their property. I'll never forget that as long as I live. My heavens. Let's see if we can find one more. Oh, here's a happier one. September 7th, 1872. It's just 9 years today since a family of refugees might have been seen entering the city of Portsmouth, where they settled and have remained to the present time. These people were from the sunny South, and their name was Moore. My, Paul did say it was important to record everyday events, the magic of ordinary days, he called it. I believe Paul was right, don't you?
Welcome to this meeting of the Bigelow Methodist Church Ladies' Aid Society. There's some seats still available up front here for those of you who are just now arriving. Thank you, President Smith and Mrs. McElroy, for those wonderful opening remarks. As a charter member of this society, they have asked me to speak to you this evening about the role that our society and other organizations like it play in our community. Now, most of you here this evening belong to several different service organizations, as do I. Together, we have worked through these organizations to establish such things as decoration or Memorial Day. Portsmouth served as a model for that celebration across the entire country. We also worked together to further honor our Civil War veterans with the placement of a statue in Tracy Park and the development of Soldier Circle and a beautiful chapel in Greenlawn Cemetery. Perhaps most importantly, we implemented programs to see to the day-to-day needs of the families of these brave young men who made the ultimate sacrifice to ensure the unity of our nation. We have marched and prayed with our temperance sisters. We have rallied for women's equality as suffragettes. Oh, we live in a rapidly changing world, sir. Embrace it. It is this very atmosphere of change that makes it impossible for us to rest on our laurels. We must cast a wider net to serve our community better as a whole. For example, the conditions in our underfunded schools simply must be addressed. Better classroom materials, special tutoring for the children who must work on their family farms. These are things we simply must have. Now, I know that many of you are working to better the lot of our children who are in need by planning a children's home. That's wonderful, but there is still much more that needs to be done. Now, Luke chapter 12, verse 48 says, "For unto whomsoever much is given, of him shall be also much required." Well, what does that mean? You're asking yourselves, what more could she possibly want from us? Well, it's quite simple, really. Open your eyes. Open your eyes to the child going barefoot in need of clothing. Open your eyes to the plight of the young widow tending her garden alone, still unable to make ends meet. Open your eyes to the family of 6 children whose father is unable to provide for them due to illness or injury. Open your eyes to the plight of our many brothers and sisters who have died in poverty and alone without the ability to afford a dignified or decent burial. Simply be a better neighbor. So many of our community's problems could be solved by being a better neighbor. We cannot expect our city government to do everything for us, to provide each and every one of our needs. That is simply not realistic. Portsmouth is our home. It is our responsibility. It is the town where we want our children to come and raise their children. And the best way to make that happen is simply to speak up. When you see a need that is not being addressed, bring it to a member of the Ladies' Aid Society. It is up to each and every one of us here tonight to ensure the vitality of our town. Now that concludes our meeting for this evening. But before we adjourn, I want to leave each and every one of you with a challenge. Come back in 2 weeks with a list of things that you would like to see accomplished and a list of practical suggestions for accomplishing them. But perhaps even more importantly, bring a list of the good things that you see in our community, and there are so many of them. I thank you, and I wish you Godspeed on your journey home.
Justice was
was denied. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. And say to those who blame us for the way we chose to fight, that sometimes there are battles that are more than black and white.
And I could not put down my sword when justice was my right. Make them hear. Make them hear.
Go out and tell the story to your daughters and your sons. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. And tell them in our struggles we were not the only ones. Make them hear you. Make them hear you. Your sword can be a sermon or the power of the pen. Teach every child to raise his voice, and then, my brothers, then will justice be demanded by 10 million righteous men. Make them hear you. When they hear you, I'll be near you. Again, make them hear you. When they hear you, I'll be near you. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. The time is drawing nigh. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. The time is drawing nigh. Children, weary, children, weary, children, weary, till your work is done. Children, weary, children, weary, children, weary, till your work is done. Christian journey soon be over. Christian journey soon be over. Christian journey soon be over. The time is drawing nigh. Christian journey soon be over. Christian journey soon be over. Christian journey soon be over. The time is drawing nigh. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. The time is drawing nigh. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning.